Right now, as you're reading this, the second largest city in the state of Washington is on fire, and the numbers I'm about to give you are already wrong because they climb almost every hour. Spokane, a city of nearly 230,000 people, and in a single night, roughly 600 homes, businesses, and buildings were reduced to smoking foundations, with only the chimneys left standing. 60,000 people have been ordered to run, and the fire is 0% contained. I want you to sit with that number for a second. 0, not 5, not 10, 0% under control. If you want to follow this story as it unfolds, because it is unfolding hour by hour, hit subscribe right now so you don't miss a single update, because what happened here in one afternoon is going to be studied for years. This is the story of the worst 24 hours in Spokane's modern history, and it starts with a warning that almost nobody outside the fire community even noticed. Let me take you back to the days before the flames, because here's the part that gives me chills. This wasn't a total surprise. The people whose entire job is to see this coming, they saw it coming. The National Weather Service issued something for eastern Washington that it had, as far as anyone can tell, never issued for that region before. They called it a particularly dangerous situation alert. That is not casual language. That is the kind of phrase forecasters use when every ingredient for a catastrophe is lining up at the same time. Bone-dry land, humidity down in the single digits, and wind, the kind of wind that turns a spark into a wall of fire faster than you can drive away from it. They looked at the map, they looked at the conditions, and they essentially raised a flag that said, if something ignites out here, we may not be able to stop it. And here's what makes it even more haunting. The state didn't wait for the first flame to act. Governor Bob Ferguson had already declared a statewide emergency and slapped a statewide burn ban across Washington. Think about that. The state of emergency existed before a single one of these major fires had even started. It's like watching someone board up their windows while the sky is still blue, because they can feel the pressure dropping. The local power company, Avista, went even further. On Friday, before anything was burning near the city, they warned people that they might deliberately shut off the power. Not because of a problem with their equipment, but because they knew that in these conditions, their own power lines could become the thing that starts the fire. They had watched what wind and dry brush could do, and they were bracing for it. So everyone was watching the sky. Everyone was uneasy. And then, just before noon on a Saturday in early August, it happened. A fire ignited near a road called Old Trails out west of the city in open country. Grass and brush, nothing dramatic to look at in the first few minutes. When crews first sized it up, they estimated it at around 50 acres. 50 acres is manageable. 50 acres is a bad afternoon, not a disaster. But then the wind did exactly what the forecasters were afraid of. 20 minutes, that's all it took. In 20 minutes, that fire doubled to 100 acres. Let that sink in. Not 20 hours, 20 minutes. The gusts were coming out of the southwest at 35 to 45 miles an hour, and the land was so dry that there was simply nothing to slow the flames down. No damp soil, no green undergrowth, nothing. Just fuel. By 1:30 that afternoon, state firefighters were being mobilized, throwing everything they had at it. But here's the thing about a fire in those conditions. It doesn't wait for you to get organized. And Spokane's geography made it so much worse. Now, why does the shape of the land matter so much? Stay with me here, because this is the detail that explains everything. The Spokane River cuts right through the middle of the city, and on both sides of that river there are steep canyons and hillsides. When the day heats up, the cool air that had been sitting near the ground rises, and that lets the wind come racing through. Those canyons act like funnels. They channel the wind, they push the fire up the slopes, over the tops, and then swirl it around in every direction. One of the federal officials who came in to help described it as some of the most turbulent, challenging wind conditions you can face. The terrain itself was working against the people trying to save the city. And then the fire did something that, if you weren't from the area, you might think was impossible. It reached the Spokane River. And a lot of people, if they'd been watching, would have breathed a sigh of relief right there. A river. Surely a river stops a fire. Surely all that water is a natural wall. It jumped it. The flames crossed the river like it wasn't even there. And I want you to remember that image, a fire leaping over a river, because it tells you everything about the raw power of what was happening. This wasn't a fire behaving by the rules. It burned uphill, tore through the city's old north side landfill area, and then pushed straight into a neighborhood called Indian Trail. Not the woods, not the outskirts. A neighborhood. Homes, streets, families. But it wasn't just one fire anymore. And this is where the afternoon went from bad to nightmare. While crews were scrambling on the first blaze, a second fire, the Fairview Fire, ignited on the other side of the county. And then, shortly before 4 in the afternoon, a third one, the Meadowview Fire, broke out northwest of where it all began. 3 separate major fires, one county, one single afternoon. Imagine being an incident commander that day, watching 3 columns of black smoke rise into the sky at the same time, and knowing you don't have 3 times the crews to fight them. By late afternoon, the governor said he'd been told that Spokane was moving into a crisis, and that word crisis turned out to be an understatement. The evacuation orders went out, and they went out fast. Everything north of Francis Avenue, west of Division Street, huge sections of the city. And these weren't gentle suggestions to maybe think about leaving. Large parts of Spokane were placed under what's called a Level 3 evacuation order. And the wording of a Level 3 is not subtle, it's not polite, and it's not designed to be. It says, leave now. This may be your only notice. Read that again. This may be your only notice. Because the terrifying truth of a fast fire is that if you wait, if you go back for one more box of photos, one more keepsake, the flames can close in around you and there is no road out. You become trapped in your own neighborhood. I've seen the videos coming out of Spokane. People driving through their own streets, filming through the windshield, and you can hear it in their voices. They can't believe what they're seeing. This is the place they've lived for years, the corner where their kids wait for the bus, the coffee shop they go to every morning, and it's glowing orange and swallowed in smoke. There's a moment in a disaster like this where the familiar becomes unrecognizable, and you can hear people's hearts breaking in real time. And, I have to be honest with you, this one hits close for me. These are essentially my neighbors. I was in this very part of the country not long ago, standing in towns that are now under threat, and I genuinely cannot believe what I'm watching. Officials said that at least 60,000 people were forced to evacuate, and that figure was just within the city limits. That doesn't count the ranches and the farms out in the countryside, and there are a lot of them. On top of the people, the fire was threatening as many as 4,000 to 5,000 structures. Around 30,000 Avista customers lost power at the peak, though the company managed to bring a lot of that back. And Avista was careful to say that the fire didn't start on their equipment, though it did burn through parts of their system. That distinction matters because power lines really can be the origin of these disasters, and everyone wanted to know how this one began. Now here's a moment in the story that I think shows you the true scale of it. A major medical center, a Veterans Affairs hospital, had to evacuate its patients. Think about the logistics of that. You're not just telling healthy adults to grab their keys and drive. You're moving people who are sick, who are recovering, who may be connected to machines, out of a building and away from an advancing fire. That is a monumental, delicate operation, and they pulled it off. Meanwhile, around 400 people ended up sleeping at the city's main convention center, which had been turned into a shelter. Families with nowhere else to go, sitting on cots, watching the news, waiting to find out if the place they call home is still standing. And it wasn't only people they were trying to save. If you look at the local social media groups, they're full of a very specific kind of heartbreak and urgency. People asking, how do we get our animals out? Does anyone have a horse trailer? Can someone help move the cattle? An animal shelter opened up in Spokane Valley just for pets. Because when you live on a farm or a ranch, your evacuation isn't just about your family. It's about the living creatures that depend on you, and you cannot fit a horse in the back seat of a sedan. That, to me, is one of the quiet tragedies inside the bigger one. The mayor of Spokane declared a state of emergency for the city, and then the governor took a step that tells you just how serious this had become. He activated the National Guard. That was the first time the National Guard had been called out for a fire in Washington since 2021. Bringing in the military isn't a small decision. It's an admission that the normal resources, as vast as they are, might not be enough. Roughly 110 Guard members were being brought in to support the fight. And then came what might be the single most chilling line from that entire night. 9 hours into the fire, the full scope of it was still unknown. Nobody knew how big it truly was, because it was still moving, still growing in the dark. And a National Guard general said out loud what everyone was privately thinking. He said that when the sun came up, they expected to be in shock. Read that one more time. Trained emergency officials, people who have seen the worst of what disasters can do, were bracing themselves to be shocked by what daylight would reveal. That's how bad it was. And when the sun did come up on Sunday morning, they were right. More than 600 structures were gone, and officials made it clear they expected that number to climb much higher as they got into the burned areas and could actually count. In the video from earlier in this story, you'll hear the figure of around 700, and honestly, in a fire like this, the truth is that the real number sits somewhere in that range and keeps rising because you can't tally the losses while the flames are still eating through neighborhoods. Entire blocks in the Indian Trail neighborhood and out on the 5 Mile Prairie were burned right down to their foundations. Not damaged, not scorched, erased. Homes reduced to a chimney and a rectangle of ash where a family's whole life used to be. Let me give you the raw scale of it in acres, because the growth is staggering. The Old Trails fire, the one that started it all, was around 3,600 acres. Fairview was roughly 1,000. Meadowview, the third one, had ballooned to nearly 4,000 acres, almost overtaking the very fire that started this entire nightmare. Altogether, the Spokane area fires had burned around 8 square miles of land in and near the city. 8 square miles. That's larger than many entire towns. 3 fires, now being managed together as a single incident, which the crews are calling the Spokane area fires. So if you hear that name, that's what it refers to. Here's a question I genuinely want you to think about, and drop your answer in the comments because I read them. When you hear that everyone saw this coming, that the warnings were issued, that emergencies were declared before the first flame, and yet 600 homes still burned in a single night, what does that tell you? Is this a failure of response, or is it simply proof that some forces are bigger than anything we can throw at them? I have my own thoughts, and I'll get to them, but I want to hear yours first. Because the truth is, this fire was fought hard, really hard. This wasn't a case of people standing around. Larger air tankers and super scoopers, those incredible aircraft that skim water off lakes and dump it on the flames, were in the air. More than 4,000 personnel poured in from 12 different states, and even from Australia. Think about that. Firefighters flying in from the other side of the planet to help defend a city in eastern Washington. And on the ground, there are the crews going house to house, standing in the heat and the smoke, spraying down homes, cutting lines, doing everything humanly possible to protect structures and save lives. In my book, those people are heroes, full stop. When everyone else is driving away from the fire, they are the ones driving toward it. And here's a small but incredibly important thing those crews are begging the public to understand, and it's the kind of detail that could genuinely save a life or a home. Do not fly drones over the fire. It sounds harmless, right? You just want to get some footage, but a single drone sighting can ground every single aircraft fighting the fire. Every tanker, every scooper, grounded, because a mid-air collision with a drone would be catastrophic. One person's curiosity can set the entire aerial firefight back by hours, and in those hours, more homes burn. The same goes for the lakes. If those super scoopers are drawing water and you're out on a boat, you have to clear the area, because they physically cannot scoop water safely with boats in the way. So if you're ever near one of these events, please keep the drone in the bag and keep the boat off the water. Now, I promised you the one piece of good news in all of this, and here it is. By Sunday, the forward progress on the Fairview and Old Trails fires had been mostly stopped. Cooler temperatures moved in, the winds eased off, and in some areas it even started to rain. That's the break the firefighters desperately needed. But, and this is a big but, do not mistake that for over. The fires are still 0% contained. Stopping the forward spread and containing a fire are two very different things. And the forecasts for the wider region were not encouraging, with dry conditions expected to hang around. So this is a pause, not a resolution. And here's the part that should stop all of us cold. This isn't the first time Spokane County has been through this. Just back in 2023, the county had 2 major fires on a single day. One of them destroyed nearly 400 structures, including well over 100 homes. The other destroyed more than 300 structures, including a couple hundred homes. So this community, just 3 years ago, lived through a devastating fire season, rebuilt, mourned, recovered, and now here it is again, only bigger. Imagine rebuilding your home after losing it, and then watching the smoke roll in a second time. That's the reality for some of these families. And Spokane, as staggering as it is not alone. Not even close. The entire Northwest is heavily impacted right now. There are 12 large fires burning across Washington state, and something on the order of hundreds of square miles have burned, with hundreds of thousands of acres in flames in areas like Wenatchee and Lake Chelan. There's a massive fire burning in the grasslands straddling western Idaho and eastern Oregon, an area full of cattle ranches where the flames have chewed through hundreds of square miles and are threatening hundreds of homes and other structures. That one was started by lightning. I've been following ranchers out in Oregon who are fighting essentially alone on bulldozers, trying to carve fire lines to save their land, their cattle, and their entire livelihood. Down in central Utah, a fire more than doubled in size over a single weekend, killing more than 100 head of cattle and forcing evacuations as it pushed toward a town. Officials there used the word catastrophic. And up north, across the border in British Columbia, in the beautiful Okanagan wine country with its lakes, monster fires are burning, some of them merging together, torching lakefront homes. And who would ever think that owning a home on the water would put you at the mercy of a wildfire? But that's exactly what's happening. One public lands official put it about as plainly as it can be put. This was already one of the busiest fire years on record, and August had only just begun. Everybody saw it coming. Nobody could stop it. And that phrase, nobody could stop it, is exactly the thing I think we need to talk about, honestly, because it opens up a much bigger and more uncomfortable conversation. I've spent time in these towns. I've been to a place called Leavenworth in Washington, an area that's also seeing fire right now. And in the town square there, they have an old tree. And around it, there's information about how to prevent fires, about logging tactics, about how to replant forests. And even standing there, you could feel a kind of quiet criticism running underneath it all, questions about whether we're actually managing these landscapes the right way. They even talked about how it used to be done centuries ago, including the controlled, intentional burns that indigenous peoples used to keep the land healthy and reduce the fuel that feeds these monster fires. And I've looked into this, and I keep coming back to something I saw for myself. Across the border, around a town called Clinton in British Columbia, I noticed years ago the scars of old burns. And then I looked at what was being planted back in. And here's what struck me. They were replanting monoculture, the same single type of tree, over and over packed close together. Not a mix of leafy, deciduous trees, not the kind of trees that hold moisture in the ground and keep the soil damp. Instead, fast-growing trees, the type that actually pull water out of the ground rather than storing it, all crammed together in neat, dense rows. And when you drive through, it's just one identical tree after another after another. And I remember thinking, you could almost predict that the same disaster would come back around and hit that exact place again. And now, that's precisely what's happening. So I have to ask, is the way we're regrowing these forests actually setting the stage for the next inferno? I genuinely want to know what you think, so let's have that discussion down in the comments. That's just my 2 cents, but I think it's a question worth sitting with. Now, let me bring you back to where things stand and to the human toll, because that's what matters most. FEMA has authorized federal funds to help. The governor has spoken directly with the president about a federal emergency declaration, and the governor himself was expected in Spokane to see the devastation firsthand. The cause of the fire is still under investigation. Investigators simply haven't determined yet how the blazes started. And here is the piece of news I've been holding on to, the one that matters more than any acreage figure or structure count. As of the latest reports, there is no confirmation that anyone has lost their life, no reported injuries, no one unaccounted for, though officials were very careful to stress that it was still early and that could change. But in a disaster of this size, with a fire that jumped a river and swallowed entire neighborhoods overnight, the fact that people got out, that the warnings worked, that those brutal level 3 orders pushed people to leave in time, that is something close to a miracle. It means that when the crews said, "Leave now," this may be your only notice, enough people listened, and it may have saved dozens or even hundreds of lives. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a city of nearly 250,000 people that watched. In the space of a single night, 600, and climbing homes and buildings vanish into ash. It leaves us with 60,000 people displaced, 400 of them sleeping in a convention center, families searching for horse trailers, patients wheeled out of a hospital, and the entire American Northwest ringed in fire from Washington to Idaho to Oregon to Utah, and up into Canada. It leaves us with a warning that came true, an emergency declared before the first flame, and a fire that not even 4,000 personnel from a dozen states and another continent could contain. Everybody saw it coming. Nobody could stop it. And maybe the hardest truth of all is that unless something changes in how we treat and rebuild these landscapes, this won't be the last time we have this conversation. If you're near any of these fires and you're in a level 3 zone, please do not go back to check on your property until officials tell you it's safe. A house can be rebuilt. You cannot. And if you want to help the people of Spokane, the city has set up an official donation portal. So please look that up and give what you can. My heart, and I know yours too, goes out to everyone across the West Coast living through this right now. I'm going to keep following this story as it develops. So if you found this valuable, do me a favor. Give this video a like. It genuinely helps more people find it. And subscribe so you're with me for the next update, because this is far from over. Drop a comment and let me know what you think about how we're managing these forests and whether you believe we could have done anything to stop this. I read every single one. And if you want to understand another slow-moving disaster that scientists are deeply worried about, the earthquakes that keep striking the supervolcano beneath Naples, where the official studies and the local experts are painting a picture that is anything but reassuring, then check out the video on your screen right now. I'll see you there. Take care of each other.